to the webinar today, the ITC Standards Map and Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence. We're really excited. This is kind of it's not a series of workshops, but the second one. There was one held later last year, and we're going to be doing an update now of this. Sustainability due diligence regulations has really had a shift for the international trade and companies' responsibilities in global value chains. And sustainability standards can support companies for their due diligence. So what we're going to be in this call today, we'll be talking about the new updates on how the standards map, the UN International Trade Center standards map, can feature standards work and contribute to the environmental and HR and environmental due diligence. So we'll be giving you an update as well as an opportunity to exchange on these topics. So very excited to have you there. Next slide, please. So our agenda will be just right now, we're going to kind of set the stage, a welcome and introduction, and then we'll be talking about the context, because when you are thinking about this, we really want to help just a really high level context setting. So also please at any time put in your questions in the, we'll have Q&A in the end. So then we'll be talking about the fundamentals of the standards map, talk about the survey results that ran over the summer, and then also have a look forward of some of the changes to come in. So next slide, please. As always, I have a little bit of housekeeping. I think we're all very used to these. We have a Q&A function at the top, so if you can use that to post your questions, we will be monitoring that. There is a recording of this, and also the slides will be sent out afterwards to those that have registered. So we'll be monitoring the Q&A. If you, by accident, put something in the chat, we'll monitor those both. I'm pretty bad at switching between the different mediums. All participants are muted at this point. We'll have a Q&A towards the end. And we do want to avoid kind of the AI generated notes because, again, this is a conversation among us. We do respect that for some people that might help with accessibility. So please let us know if that's the case. But otherwise, we would ask that you turn off any of your AI type of note takers. All right, next slide, please. So we wanted to do a quick poll just for those who have joined. Do you already know the ITC standards map? And so we'll launch that in just a second. And as you see, the names are not recorded. We will share the results. So. Oh, wow, we got 91%. That's good. So maybe you know it from the webinar invite, but that's really great. So we have a few that are not familiar with that. So 91% right now is showing that. So I can't actually see how many have responded, but that looks like already a good indicator if it's that high that so many are familiar with it. So that'll be great because then you can really dive deeper into with some questions as we get to those. All right, next slide. So just wanted to, just for before I turn over to the speakers, we have two great speakers and I'll let them introduce themselves. The UN, the United Nations International Trade Center, is this joint agency of the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. It was established in 1964 in Switzerland, in Geneva. And they've been working with the standards map since now, I think the anniversary is coming up quite soon, for a number of years, and getting past the decade. We're past teenagers now with the standards map, and we'll be hearing more about the standards map in just a bit. So turn it over to Petra.
Yes, thank you very much, Amy, and a warm welcome to all of our participants today. It's very nice to be here together with you, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, whereby Shemina Amarsi is going to be speaking for most of the part. There's also Akshata Limaye from our team, who's also in the background, and then myself, Petra Walterova. I'm a program officer at the International Trade Center, the Trade for Sustainable Development program, where a lot that we do, it really evolves about standards map, which is going to be the main focus of today's webinar. But just before we get to the standards map and the important updates, we thought that we should provide a little bit of a background of what we are presenting today, because it is a part of a broader project that's very kindly funded by the European Union. And it's enabling us to carry out those updates to the standards map, making it really fit for purpose for the current reality of what Amy also described, of the current reality of the sustainability landscape. And that's one of the outputs of this project that really focuses in general on global public goods and providing really market intelligence on specifically for our case, really on sustainability standards and due diligence. The project, however, doesn't only cover the standards map, but also supports a number of complementary activities with partners and stakeholders, namely towards really increased awareness of opportunities and challenges faced by small businesses to participate in due diligence activities, with quite specific focus on corporate sustainability due diligence directive, because you might know that ITC really focuses on a lot of activities, different projects on responsible business conduct. But the project that we're really focusing on today is the market intelligence on sustainability standards via standards map and kind of attending activities. So what we have also developed as part of this project is a kind of a supplier preparedness diagnostic tool, which is embedded in the standards map platform and analyzes the CSDDD and the due diligence principles that suppliers need to be aware of. A sneak peek of which is actually included in the next slide. Kshata, if you can go there, please. Thank you. So just very quickly, the below screenshot is a snapshot of that CSDDD related questionnaire, whereby it's not public yet. We will be implementing it actually starting this fall, so you get a bit of exclusive sneak peek here. And we'll be implementing it jointly through capacitating several business support organizations in partner countries, kind of trying to increase essentially already their level of knowledge on the CSDDD, the implications, the expectations. And that knowledge they could then use further in their work with their constituents and other multipliers in the countries. And through these BSOs, or the business support organizations, early next year, we hope to collect some first responses from a number of companies that are typically served by these BSOs. And it's going to be kind of a testing of that questionnaire really in real life. And we hope to really see, based on this data collection, also how prepared some of these different types of constituents of the VSOs are actually ready to respond to types of expectations in CSDDD. Towards the end of next year, and you see a little bit of the timeline there as well, we are hoping to organize then 2 roundtables where we would like to share some of that knowledge gathered in this process. And then obviously we hope that the tool is going to be very much useful beyond that. Maybe for the next slide, Akshata, please, because we want to give a general context. I believe just having looked at the list of people currently participating in this webinar, this might be completely useless, but we wanted to really provide a very quick overview of why we speak about due diligence and standards map. Again, you probably all know that, but it's just to say that really companies today face growing expectations, obviously, on not to comply with sustainability standards, but also to actively manage different impacts that their operations or business relationships, etc., may have. And that's where the HREDD, or the human environmental due diligence, kind of comes in. It's the process that enterprises should carry to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for the actual and potential adverse impacts on people, planet, and society. Then we also talk about RBC, responsible business conduct, where we are really talking about the HREDD, but framed in line with international standards. And what it really is really to move from compliance kind of checklists towards embedding responsibility and responsible business conduct into core business practices. I think that, again, for this, everyone here, and we have also OECD colleagues participating, so this is just as a little reminder, and we can go to slide after this one, because obviously I think that generally these concepts are kind of not concepts anymore, but they are really shaping regulatory landscape. And here we have attempted based on some previous presentations. We kind of put together essentially or attempted to describe a little bit the development of those of that regulatory landscape. It really has shifted a lot from, let's say, 2008/11, where the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights were published, and into 2018, where OECD published, I think, for the first time, kind of a more standardized due diligence guidance. And then really between 2014 through to this year, there has been a lot of mandatory legislative initiatives that have been really introduced. I think quite importantly, Europe has led this kind of trend with the highest number of instruments introduced. But then North America and more recently Asia and the Pacific are following suit as well. And together these developments cover really nearly all major export markets for developing countries. So the reach is really global and it's quite urgent, let's say. I'll stop here so that we have enough time to also delve into how then Standards Map can fit into this picture. So I will then please give the word over to Shamina.
Thanks a lot, Petra. And before we kick in, and it's so nice to see you or to have you in this workshop, there was a little poll that we wanted to post again, because the topic of today is really, we would like to present you the updates on the standards map, but also reflect together on the role that your organizations, if you're representing a standard organization, or what standards what is the role that it can play when it comes to sustainability due diligence. And thank you so much, Petra, for having walked us through the background and putting us into the mindset and us having the different milestones that we should be aware of. But now the question is also on the role. What role you think sustainability standards can play in terms of corporate sustainability due diligence? And that's precisely the topic of this webinar. This is exactly what we are going to discuss about. But before that, we just wanted to get a bit of your views on that. It's an open question. Feel free to share now a few thoughts. And we'll be also having, as Emmy said earlier, we will have a Q&A session in the end, so we'll be able to also interact on that. But I see also there's a response about accompanying measures. We will definitely discuss that. So please do not hesitate to respond to this question, to the poll. We will reflect a little bit together, and once you will have had enough time to respond, we will deep dive and present a little bit more about the standards map. Amy, perhaps I will let you see when is the good time to wrap up on those questions. Of course, in any case, as I said, there are many, there will be other opportunities to interact at the end of the session. So if you can still see the screen, I would say that perhaps we move on to the next slide and park a little bit that question on the role of sustainability standards on human rights and due diligence. And the next slide is actually showing to you a few examples. So in the poll, somebody has responded about accompanying measures. One point that we were observing from a standards map perspective, in terms of role of standards when it comes to HRADD, when it comes to human rights and environmental due diligence, is that first of all, many standards, from what we observe from standards map analytical perspective, already have been providing for a long time reporting templates, policy templates when it comes to identifying or mitigating or seizing particular due diligence risk areas. So you provide a lot of information already, sectoral information about risks, about remediation, about mitigation in general. And because we are talking about voluntary standards, and Petra walked us through the different directives and the legislative background, but we are talking about this dichotomy between mandatory and legal minimum and voluntary. We see that many standards, not all of them, but many standards who are active in this area go beyond and above the minimum legal requirements. So they have potentially the possibility to drive more holistic impacts because they have more of a sectoral approach. They can bring also a sort of sector-wide consistency because of the supply chain knowledge that they bring, because each of them, and we're going to discuss that as well, all focus on a specific product, on a specific sector, on a specific supply chain issue. They can bring consistency and transparency in applying and assessing sustainability risks and impacts. So this really goes back to the response that was given earlier in the poll about accompanying measure. Standards potentially could be a tool, one tool that help enterprises to fulfill their due diligence obligations because they provide a room for sharing information, baseline thresholds or criteria for measurement, templates, and also they enable a sense of collectiveness because for many of them, they are based on multi-stakeholder governance backgrounds, so they bring together different actors of the supply chains or different type of stakeholders that can enable together collective action and drive implementation and partnership. So you understood from ITC standards map perspective, we see and we foresee many different potential roles that standards could play into accompanying and to helping companies with their tools and their normative frameworks in fulfilling corporate sustainability and due diligence imperative. So from the perspective of the standards map, there were a few reminders in the next slide that we wanted to give to you, although in the first poll, everyone, the majority of the respondents responded that they knew the standards map already. We wanted to give you in the next slide a bit of background again on the standards map to understand how and potentially whether and to what extent the standards map can reflect this work, your work when it comes to due diligence. So why the standards map was created in the first place? First of all, because to date, if we speak about all the certain figures, in the standards map, there are 366 sustainability standards which are represented. There are a lot of labels, a lot of certification models, a lot of standards that exist. And the primarily aim of the standards map was really to help different stakeholders and primarily small and medium enterprises from developing countries to understand and to have access to standard. And when we mean standard, when we click on the next item, it's very large from ITC standards map perspective. It can mean an audit protocol. A standard can be CSR code of conduct. It can be a reporting framework. It can be a certification program. So that's very large. Some standards are multi-stakeholder based, some others are government backed, some just provide some tools and information as we just saw, others set requirements. So they are a different kinds of standards, and the way they are set up has also an impact on their impact, and the way they are designed has also an impact on the way they are implemented. And definitely the idea is that the standards map was created in the first place to be able to differentiate and to identify the synergies and between standards and how they work. And as Nicolas is rightly putting in the chat, they are really they can promote more pragmatic and concrete action points. So they come hand to hand somehow. Nicolas, I'm interpreting what you're just saying, but happy to have the exchange at the end of the webinar. They are a way also to implement the legislation, so they can also provide, as Nicolas said, independent verification and of legislation based on self-declarations. So there are indeed different type of interventions that the standards can have. And this is really the reason to be of the standards map. If we go on the next slide, and as Amy was saying, the standards map was created 14 years ago as a global public tool. So it's available for everyone. It was meant to accelerate the transition to sustainable trade, and it was primarily geared and adapted and made for SMEs to be able to add value to their product. But if we move to the next slide, you will see, and we have observed, if we look a little bit in terms of traffic and usage of the tool, that the users of the tool are not only SMEs, but also brands, also policymakers, also NGOs, academia. And so as you can see on your screens, the tool has been widely used in almost in many countries around the world. It represents 19 industry sectors, more than 360 standards, and it's based on 1,500 database criteria. I'm mentioning all of that because it was part, and it is part of the reflection on how Standards Map can actually present the work of standards better, further, and especially when it comes to human rights and environmental due diligence. So in the next slide, you will see certain of the functions that the Standards Map users can have or can use. You can identify standards per product, per origin and destination market, per sustainability themes. There are different ways and different filters to use to be able to identify the standard or the standards that are of interest to you. In the next slide, you will see that there's another feature in the Standards Map, which is meant to actually present a standards profile. You will see on screen the newcomer in the Standards Map, the copper mark. I think Emily from the copper mark is also in the call. So this is the latest entry into the Standards Map. Just to say that when you click and you enter into the website, you can have an entry point to the standard, a quick presentation, what sector it presents, what value chain it covers, what is the geographical focus, but also you can go a bit further by looking at the verification and audit procedures, the governance and standard setting model, certain facts and figures, and all the requirements of the standard. Another feature also, if we move to the next slide, is the possibility to compare. So compare is meant in a very cautious way. It doesn't mean there's no ranking, there's no scoring. There's just a description of what standard de facto do and what are their requirements. And if anyone and different users want to have different comparisons between standards in terms of what do they cover, what is the sustainability area they are focusing in, they have the ability to do so, and they can do so per sectoral focus or per product focus, which of course brings a more value to their comparison and their analysis. And for those who want to go further, and this is also important for the rest of our conversation, they can actually go criteria by criteria, theme by theme, climate change, human rights, labor rights, and go and deep dive and see what are exactly the criteria of the standard, the time to comply by the operators. So this type of advanced feature are available on Standards Map, and we are going to discuss about them. So in the next slide, you will see also as many of you know, because you've been involved into that as standard setting organizations, that the whole collection process and the data collection process behind all these features that you saw is always ongoing, and it's always following 3 steps. First of all, each time there's a new version of your standard or there is a new standard, ITC loads and the information and collects the data. Then an independent expert will review that information. And then the last step is that you as standard setting organization will check and revise and complete that information. And this is iterative because it's changing very quickly. So this process is robust. It's needed to make sure that the information is accurate, is neutral, without any value judgment, and is complete enough. And this process is repeated until the official publication results, and of course is updated regularly. So those were reminders also to explain the background behind all of these features that we are going to present and discuss. I think in the next slide, we will have a quick presentation of the partners of the Standards Map. They are, as you can see, different logos, different partners. The OECD who is also here in this call, many other partners also who are working hand to hand with the Standards Map with different focus or different objectives depending on what is their area of interest, but mostly what they try to do is to leverage the Standards Map database to increase transparency, to foster harmonization of standards, or to use this data for certain equivalency assessment of sustainability standards, or sometimes also to shed light on potential interplay between public policies and regulations. You see on the screen, for instance, we have a partnership with the Global Coffee Platform. I think Gabrielle from the GCP is in the call. So those are ways also to show that this data that is collected on a continuous basis and your data that is shown on a standards map can also be used when it's possible by different partners, multi-development banks, different UN agencies, private sector, public sector, to actually accelerate the transition to sustainability trade, and also to harmonize or set up threshold recognition models. So this was to give you the full picture of the standards map data, to which you are completely the stakeholder of. And in the next slide, what we wanted to give you is actually a question again, and you will have a poll that will appear also on your screen. We wanted to ask you, as you have seen those different features, those different presentations, identification of standards, comparison of standards, certain graphs, how can the role of standards when it comes to HRADD be better presented on the standards map? Again, it's an open question, so feel free to type, to reflect, to type later during the poll now, or within the chat if you have more insights. But this is the whole question that we have been asking yourselves and ourselves since the beginning of this project. Just while you are answering, for those who were part of this first workshop, there was a first workshop back in December 2024, where this work was actually kicked in and this reflection was actually mentioned, and then over this year there has been some reflection on how to better present the role and the role of standards when it comes to HRADD in standards map. There was also a consultation, a public consultation during the summer. We will present a little bit on the results, but we wanted to get a bit of your brains and time and to see what was your vision. So we got a lot of feedback, and probably many of you have already given feedback in written during the public consultation in the summer, but some of you already said those elements that are mentioned, for instance, more visualization, more about materiality. So we got a lot of insights on how to improve or how to present a little bit more the work of standards or the contribution of standards when it comes to HRADD. So please feel free to continue responding. As Amy said in the chat, what you think about possible improvement. It's a tough question, but we like your the idea of asking you those tough questions and to get those responses to be able to improve the product as much as possible. So there are a lot of responses that appear already in terms of overlap, human rights, method and consequences, assessment method. This came a lot during the consultations, to be honest. Measurement of impact, standards requirements, highlighting overlap. You have mentioned that already, environmental risk, human rights risks. So thanks a lot for those reflections. It helps us a lot to stay tuned with your reflection and to see whether this is reflecting the evolutions that you see coming from your perspective as organizations as well and with your stakeholders. So please continue to share thoughts on that. Everything is recorded and we will have everything in the poll. So these are inputs which are very important for the evolutions of the Standards Map website in general. The measurement of impact is key indeed, and the priorities for companies. This came a lot as well during the public consultation. Indeed, during the summer, you may have received a survey where we took, actually ITC sent out a survey to ask again about the standards map, about the knowledge of standards map, the current features and what could be improved and what could be improved, especially from a HRADD perspective. So just to give you a few hints on the survey results, if we move to the next slide, you will see that so there was a good participation, 110 participants from different countries and different type of respondents, and very detailed responses. What we've observed, a lot of feedback, a lot of ideas, a lot of input for the tool. So thanks a lot for those who have responded consequently to to the questionnaire. And also a good representation of SMEs who are and especially from developing countries, who are really the primary beneficiary from ITC when it comes to ITC's objective and goals. So in the next slide, you will see that, and if you remember, during the presentation, we were presenting the different features of the standards map. You have the possibility to identify standards, to compare. You can also actually do some self-assessments, and Petra also presented a new product or a new questionnaire that ITC is now launching related to HREDD, a self-assessment questionnaire. So there are different functions which are either linked to the standards map or embedded into the standards map, or in any case also really reflecting and connected to the standards map. So when we ask to respondents how they currently use the standards map, most of them said that they use the standards map to compare standards. And then secondly, some others say that they use for self-assessment, for identification, for self-assessment, also to get sectoral information in a coffee sector, in a mining sector, for instance. And 15% of the users actually use those filters that I've mentioned earlier when it comes to filtering per your area of interest, sustainability area, or product, or geographical coverage. And this was a feedback that was important for us, because when it comes to HREDD, there is this idea, and those features are going to be live also by the end of the year, to actually have a new filter related to due diligence process. So this is something that we are going to discuss, but this is also the reason to be of this survey, and this was a good feedback that we could use for that. So the next slide is giving you the results of the question related to the potential other type of use of the standards map. And many of the respondents came with a lot of ideas when it comes to the navigation, when it comes to the translation of the data, and of the different features of the standards map in different languages. A lot of feedback was given when it comes to more communication for companies, for instance, to know that those benchmarking and those comparison exists, and they can use that framework already. So there was a lot about also the communication, the idea of having some case studies as well, or some success case scenarios as well. A lot of ideas when it comes to AI, also how the AI can be leveraged to actually improve the interoperability of the standards map. But there was one feedback that was extremely important, and that gave somehow a bit of a direction of travel. It was about this idea of having a typology of standards embedded within the standards map. So this is coming from a publication that was released last year by the OECD and ITC about presenting a typology framework for standards, taking into account what we were saying earlier, the fact that standards, sustainability initiatives are very different from one another, how to navigate around them, and how to characterize them with certain commonalities and differentiators. And I think in the earlier question about how to better present the contribution of standards when it comes to HREDD, several of you responded highlighting complementarities, highlighting gaps, so between standards. So this wheel that you see on screen is a way to present in a different way, in a more visual way, what standards do and what are their scope. When we go back to the typology framework, which was developed by the two organizations in this publication that was launched last year, what is the scope of the standard? What is the objective of the standard? What is our operation model? And what is their governance model? Operation model, it's very linked also to an earlier feedback which was given in the poll. How is this implemented? So the design and the implementation, also from one of the feedback that we are getting in the chat. So the survey sent out this idea of replicating the typology wheel that came from this publication that you can see now in the chat if you want to have access, to have that in standards map and to present the standards data in this way. And the feedback was highly positive. And we can discuss that a bit also during this session. But the feedback was extremely positive in the sense that there was the idea that, yes, this would be needed because it was also presented as a solution that can be scalable and that would increase, help the narrative to explain the relevance of standards when it comes to due diligence in particular, but also in sustainability in general. And also when it related to the question of accountability and helping also the different supply chain actors who do not necessarily have access to all information, it was seen basically as a good idea. There was also some feedback saying that some classification shall be added, some scoring. But again, if we go back to the fundamentals, which was even presented at the beginning of this webinar, the reason to be of such a tool of the standards map is really to remain completely neutral. It's not about adding any scoring, any classification or ranking of standards. It's actually to present what standards do and what they don't do. The idea is to increase transparency and access to standards. So this was one feedback, important feedback that was retained during the consultation. A second feedback is also very much linked to the topic that we are discussing today in the next slide, which is the due diligence and more particularly due diligence processes. An idea was put forward actually to present what standards contribute based on their normative requirements and based on their documentations and on their work, how they contribute to the different steps of due diligence. And we're talking about the 6 steps now. But we are talking about processes, how they can contribute to help, to accompany companies and enterprises in fulfilling their due diligence duties when it comes to identify, to remediate, to embed, to assess, to report all of the duties, not necessarily in the order that companies have to do and need tools for that. So again, the feedback on that, to add this new sort of presentation of how standards cover certain due diligence processes, was also received positively. And we would like to discuss all of that with you as well. But many respondents also said that these colors that you see on screen can be improved. And again, the idea of showing progress and showing scores. So it's very interesting because indeed, and I think Petra has mentioned that at the beginning of the webinar, when it comes to corporate sustainability due diligence, when it comes to due diligence, it's never over, it's always ongoing. This identification of risks, of adverse impact, it's never finished. So it's completely there. So a lot of participants said, actually, a wheel like that is not really representing the fact that there's a time frame, there are some evolutions. And to be honest, it was not easy to respond to that because, again, there are a lot of, and I'm sure we will discuss that, there are a lot of disclaimers and important communication points that needs to be made when you talk about a standard organization, about standards work. The standards and certifications are not a way, cannot be in any way a way for companies to actually just say that their risks are covered and they are fine. They're just a tool for that. And so the narrative, the communication for that shall be very, very cautious. This is the feedback that we got from you. And this is the imperative that we are trying to keep when working on those visuals. So again, the idea of showing scores or showing evolutions, we're a bit cautious with that. So just to give you in full transparency, the whole reflection behind this visual that you see on screen. So in a nutshell, if we move to the next slide, the ideas based on all those feedback, and we would really like to take a bit of time during this webinar, actually the last part of the webinar will be around that, to get your feedback on that. There will be 2 main evolutions that you are going to see by the end of the year. This typology wheel that you see on screen will be embedded in the standards map. So if you remember when we were talking at the beginning of the webinar about the different features, there are some profiling of standards. When you click on one standard, we have the example with a copper mark, there are 365 others. When you click on one, you can see a profile and a quick presentation. So this will be presented based on the standards map data. And on top of that will come a short snippet of presenting what the standard is about, what it covers, what is, again, is it a verification initiative or a facilitation initiative? And you will find all those definitions. Is there is the sector coverage defined or not defined? And if you see at the bottom of your screen, you see the due diligence steps as well. So you will see from the standards map data that you are filling in the back end, certain of these steps will be highlighted if they are addressed in the normative requirements of standards, then they will be highlighted. And also a couple of other features when it comes to operations about the assurance systems. Is there a grievance mechanism? Does the standard tackle chain of custody? What is the sustainability claim? Is there an M&E system? All of that in one visual. So also the idea will be to really show what's covered and what's not covered, again, without any value judgment. But with this idea of highlighting the synergies and the gaps between standards, it's also important to see what standards don't do for a good reason, but they don't do it because they cover different sustainability scopes, or they focus on different mission statement and different areas. So the idea is, again, to increase transparency on that. So this typology will be presented and embedded in the standards map by the end of the year. And secondly, in the next slide, you will see those steps that we were mentioning in terms of due diligence process. So this will showing how standards contribute to the different steps of the due diligence, and there will be those filters as well. These filters, the filter is already there in standards map, but it's going to be improved based on this information and this whole work and research and consultation that was done. So I will wrap up for now because I would like to open the floor. We would like to open the floor for Q&A, but just to give a bit of milestones and where all this is coming from. 2024, there was a whole revision of the back-end criteria from the standards map when it comes to environmental and human rights due diligence to align as much as possible with the legislations, with the soft laws, with the different frameworks. 2025, and we're reaching now, we are very well advanced in 2025. The idea was to reflect all of that in the front end, in the website. Thus the consultation, thus the webinar back in December, and thus the webinar that we have today, where we are presenting you those final results and presenting you those features that are going to be implemented. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I would like to hand the floor to Amy, because we would really like to hear a bit of your feedback and your questions if you have any on all this work. And thanks a lot in advance.
Thank you, Shamina. That was really a phenomenal presentation, lots of information, and as we said, it's being recorded, and we will also be sending out the slide deck and such, because it was a lot of details, but it was a great presentation, very digestible, accessible, of a lot of very interesting things, particularly because it's reflecting the feedback from the stakeholders and the users, which many are on the call. I have not seen anything actually posted in the Q&A, and you can feel free, as I said, if you want to put it in the chat as well. I do want to take advantage. We have here on the call, organizations kind of spread across we've got some government representatives. We have several that are scheme owners or benchmarking organizations that are using the standards map actively. So we have both some users, some scheme owners, some of these, the standard owners. Quite a range of, got from the social and labor convergence program. So it would be great to hear, even if it's not questions, maybe some of your own experiences, either as a user or as being part of the standards map. or if you have questions or things that are working or not working. So wanted to see if there was, and I guess Akshita, do you need to unmute the?
Yeah, I think now all the participants can raise hand and
Okay,
also
great.
unmute themselves. Yeah.
Great. I didn't want to offer that you could raise your hand if we hadn't allowed you to speak as well. So, is there any of those on the call that would like to perhaps talk a little bit about your experience? Um, well, I'll keep an eye on that. I do encourage you all to look at the resources that we put there in the chat on the typology, for example. And, we didn't go through the history of it, but that can be found in the document, a bit of the context. ITC does run a technical working group, and there are several organizations on this call that are involved in that. Global Coffee Platform, OECD, all of our acronyms. If you do raise your hand and unmute, introduce yourself. And if you have an acronym as your organization, say what it is. So the International Institute for Sustainable Development, the Global Coffee Platform, OECD, I think we can use that one. Most are familiar with that, but just want to make sure that, and a host of other organizations were involved in developing that typology, almost over 2 years process. And it kind of goes back to Nicholas' point of standards being used for regulation and as verify these. And the challenge had been that there's not this common language. And so that's, again, we really appreciate the contribution from Nicholas about how it kind of, it harmonizes a bit. So you can, when you're talking about certain aspects, and from the wheel that Shamina showed, if you're talking about operational requirements, then you can look at these were considered the most material. Now, there's a host of others, as Shamina also pointed out. And for those that are standards users, the standards map users, that's some of the biggest challenges of how do you use that information, because it is information, and it still will be up to the users of the standards map to contextualize that, to turn information into knowledge. So kind of where we are with AI, it can help you work through all of the information, but you still need to contextualize that to your particular use case, whether it's for trade policy, whether you're for a company on human rights and environmental due diligence, whether you're an SME. So there's a whole range of those. So I wanted to see if there were any questions there. And I did not thank formally Petra for her contribution. Any questions or any, Petra, after hearing that presentation from Shamina, do you think that there are any parts particularly for this audience that might be important to highlight?
No, I think on my side, there was one thing that I didn't mention completely, but the tool that I was talking about, which is really for, let's say, the tier 1 suppliers, so not the companies in scope of the CSDDD, which is really the piece of legislation kind of encapsulating the due diligence process on the EU market. We did actually map the individual questions in the questionnaire with the standards map criteria. So already with the enhanced and updated list of criteria that Shamina also described, which had been a process before. So the tool also presents these linkages, let's say, with the relevant criteria from the different standards that might be of interest, of importance, or of use to those suppliers that that will work through the questionnaire. And also in the spirit of the standards map, it's really more for comparison. So we are not, creating kind of lists of or checklists or kind of ticking box exercise, but it's only to compare information that's contained in the standards and then how it can essentially inform the entire let's say, thinking of the company and adjustment of processes and really considering what they have been doing and what they might not have been doing, so that they are better informed and better prepared to engage with their counterparts within the value chain. So that's just maybe one thing to kind of wrap it all up. That's also why I was saying the tool is embedded in the standards map, which is not only for the convenience of that, but also there are actual linkages with the database, and that makes the tool quite specific, I think, also also compared to other HREDD or RPC related tools out there that are already functioning, in the various supply chains. Second piece of information on the tool specifically, that it's actually quite sector specific, even though we believe that the basic questionnaire can actually be used also across all different sectors, just like standards map. So just to maybe provide information on that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Those are really good points. And that it is that mapping that enables, again, Nicholas, thank you for your great, valuable contribution. It enables you to understand, that role is where it says where the standards and labels can have the value of which of the aspects of it. But as I said as well, I think the second point that Nicholas had made comes back to the word cloud, that that assessment methodology. So it's not just what's in the content requirements, your sustainability criteria, but actually how it's implemented. So the compliance, the assurance, nonconformities, resolving those, et cetera. So thank you, Nicholas, for those. I saw a hand raised briefly, and then I was wondering, Akshita, if we should take it off the presentation mode. Nicholas, was it your hand was raised maybe?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I've been working with Standards Map now, or filling in data for many years. And before I got in contact with Standards Map, I worked 19 years with standards and certifications, and I've filled in so many comparison systems over the years, and I've answered so many questions from brand owners and purchasers on the difference between different labels and standards and so on. And everyone focused on the criteria set until I reached Standards Map, and suddenly you look at the systems and the credibility behind the system, and that is unique. That's your unique selling point, and that's what you have that other comparison tools they spend too little focus on that, and it's really important when looking at different initiatives driving sustainability, because there are so many different ways to do this, and there are so many loopholes and so many ways to get around and mislead in this area.
Thank you for emphasizing that. That's really important. So it's not just the content of it, but the quality of the implementation. So very appreciated. So we had another hand raised, Titi, I think it is, and it's from Fair Trade International, if I'm not mistaken. If you would like to.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you very much. At Fair Trade, we are really glad to see the due diligence focus in the standards map, and also the typology coming in. The big wheel. It's really exciting. So thank you for ITC and for the standards map to continue driving us sort of forward with what external developments it is appropriate for standards to take into account and acknowledge. I really recognize that my comment goes beyond what is really feasible or even really needed today, but I still wanted to say to speak up and say that I see that the typology really, it includes a lot of the key elements, and then I think going forward, of course, you always keep developing your map as well, and we keep trying to develop our own standard systems. So I think in near future, I hope that we still continue developing our thinking of what due diligence means for standards. At the moment, of course, it is the first thing to include standard criteria on the 6 steps of due diligence. But in the end, those 6 steps, they are just the skeleton of due diligence. And I guess what is really new in the due diligence approach is an increased emphasis on rights holder engagement, meaningful engagement with rights holders, and it's shared responsibility. So not just pushing all supply chain actors to do as many measures to prevent, mitigate, and remediate as possible, but also to work together. And it's about continuous development. And I think that is a big challenge for many of us standard systems. How do we not just do pass fail, but continuous development or encourage that? And then I think also really challenging is being risk-based. Could we one day come to accept that just like the largest corporations in the world are allowed to focus on their salient risks and issues, we could also allow that for smallholder farmer cooperatives and factories, others who are being certified, that we wouldn't require a huge long list of detailed requirements for them to fill, but we would accept that they could actually focus on the risks and issues that are the largest for each of them, and then not focus on the other topics.
Yeah.
So
No.
just, but thank you. My main point is thank you for this.
Oh, well, I think the speakers really will appreciate that. And I think that's a wonderful note to end on, the concept of shared responsibility. These are big, complex challenges. So shared responsibility in, both in the risk and the rewards, as well as that kind of level playing field, and ensure we have a just, inclusive transition. So I think that's a wonderful note to end on. And I'll turn it back to Shamina and Petra to just kind of wrap us up. But thank you for that really valuable contribution. And it is challenging, but together, and we hope to navigate this.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Amy, a lot for these comments and inputs. It's extremely useful. This is a work in progress, and I think, Italy, you said it right. Niklas, you said it as well, a lot about the systemic aspect that needs to be looked at for comparability and to understand what's the system behind the criteria. But again, with this comment, we are going back to the criteria again, and this is always evolving. So this type of feedback is really for us, or these interactions is really golden mine for us, because those skeleton that we are talking about, those deep dive on the criteria, how the right holders and the most vulnerables are embedded into the whole system, is their continuous improvement, the risk-based approach, are elements that are more analytical and always reviewed within the back end of the analysis. So I think it was indeed a very great way to finalize, because standards organizations and standards are evolving on their side. This tool is evolving as well, and this type of feedback allows us to, interact and evolve together on those common issues, and perhaps go a step further when presenting what standards can do and can't do when it comes to due diligence and what is making a meaningful change. So yes, we could also continue on those topics, but it's really a big thank you from our side for your time, for your participation, and for all your feedback on this process. It's very valuable to us. And I don't know, Petra, if you want to also say a few words to finalize.
No, I think you've said it all. For me, it's just a big thanks to you, Shamina. Also, a big kudos, because you're really leading the work. But obviously, we wouldn't have been with the standards map where we are without all of you that are also on the webinar, without our technical working group of specialized partners as well. And it's really a lot of two-way communication. So as Shamina said, we really appreciate all this feedback. We really Standards Map is for transparency. We also very much appreciate being transparent, on the other side, and just really having this kind of two-way communication, and always really be driven by also what the standard systems actually do tell us, and all the other stakeholders and actually users of Standards Map. So very important. Thank you so much for all your support so far. And also, obviously, we wouldn't have been here without our donors to the Standards Map. So also a big appreciation to them, which is obviously the European Union, but also others that might be actually in the audience. So I'll just stop there. I think we're already over time. Amy, I don't know if you would like just to kind of wrap up.
That already done. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your week. And the slides and the recording will go out.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.